Yo, what's good, YouTube? This is Who Is Like God coming at you late night for my next Torah study. It's been a little bit of time. We're going to come right in. Today we're going to be reading Leviticus chapters 11 and 12. These chapters are easier to understand. I think we covered probably some of the hardest stuff in the book of Leviticus, so we're going to continue and get into all of these different things. Y'all can check out my Leviticus study playlist to see all the videos studying this book. So with that being said, we're going to start with Leviticus 11, y'all, which is the regulations God given to the Israelites about clean and unclean animals. So with that being said, and the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying to them, speak to the people of Israel, saying, these are the living things that you may eat among all the animals that are on the earth. Whatever parts the hoof and is cloven-footed and chews the cud among the animals you may eat. Nevertheless, among those that chew the cud or part the hoof, you shall not eat these. The camel, because it chews the cud but does not part the hoof, is unclean to you. And the rock badger, because it chews the cud but does not part the hoof, is unclean to you. And the hare, because it chews the cud but does not part the hoof, is unclean to you. And the pig, because it parts the hoof and is cloven-footed but does not chew the cud, is unclean to you. You shall not eat any of their flesh, and you shall not touch their carcasses. They are unclean to you. So God is listing out all the animals that are forbidden, basically. All right. Verse 9. These you may eat of all that are in the waters. Everything in the waters that has fins and scales, whether in the seas or in the rivers, you may eat. But anything in the seas or the rivers that does not have fins and scales, of the swarming creatures in the waters and of the living creatures that are in the waters, is detestable to you. You shall regard them as detestable. You shall not eat any of their flesh, and you shall detest their carcasses. Everything in the waters that does not have fins and scales is detestable to you. So we're getting different animals that are forbidden, but it's pretty easy to understand because it's going through the different basically categories. First we had different land animals. Now we're going into the aquatic animals, what you can and cannot eat. Pick up at verse 13. And these you shall detest among the birds. They shall not be eaten. They are detestable. The eagle, the bearded vulture, the black vulture, the kite, the falcon of any kind, every raven of any kind, the ostrich, the nighthawk, the seagull, the hawk of any kind, the little owl, the cormorant, the short-eared owl, the barn owl, the tawny owl, the carrion vulture, the stork, the heron of any kind, the hoopoe, and the bat. Some animals here I've never even heard about before. That's interesting. Verse 20, all winged insects that go on all fours are detestable to you. Yet among the winged insects that go on all fours you may eat those that have jointed legs above their feet with which to hop on the ground. Of them you may eat the locust of any kind, the bald locust of any kind, the cricket of any kind, and the grasshopper of any kind. But all other winged insects that have 4 feet are detestable to you. So interesting. Locusts and grasshoppers are allowed as snacks among the bug world. Verse 24. And by these things you shall become unclean. Whoever touches their carcass shall be unclean until the evening, and whoever carries any part of their carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until the evening. Every animal that parts the hoof but is not cloven-footed or does not chew the cud is unclean to you. Everyone who touches them shall be unclean. And all that walk on their paws among the animals that go on all fours are unclean to you. Whoever touches their carcass shall be unclean until the evening, and he who carries their carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until the evening. They are unclean to you. One theme we'll get, we have the clean and the unclean animals. If you mess with the unclean animal in the sense that you interact with its carcass in any way, you will be unclean until the evening. I'll point that out because the whole notion of being unclean till evening is going to play a role later on. A lot of the laws that had to deal with the cleanliness, the ceremonial cleanliness of the Israelites had this sort of time factor where when you would try to cleanse yourself, you would be unclean until the evening. So if you interact with something unclean, there would sort of be a time marker, a time window to where that would pass away and you would almost be renewed in that sense. Granted, you wash your clothes first after encountering the unclean thing. Verse 29. And these are unclean to you among the swarming things that swarm on the ground. The mole rat, the mouse, the great lizard of any kind, the gecko, the monitor lizard, the sand lizard, and the chameleon. These are unclean to you among all that swarm. Whoever touches them when they are dead shall be unclean until the evening. And anything on which any of them falls when they are dead shall be unclean, whether it is an article of wood, or a garment, or a skin, or a sack, any article that is used for any purpose. It must be put into water, and it shall be unclean until the evening. Then it shall be clean. So what this shows is that ceremonial cleanliness is what's in view instead of necessarily moral purity or moral impurity. The reason I say that is because even wood and articles of clothing can become unclean, and obviously they're not sentient beings that have the capacity to do good or evil. So the uncleanness applies even to wood and objects that we can hold that may interact with a dead carcass, and then you bathe them just like you would bathe yourself until the evening, and then it's good to go again. So it's interesting the lesson, the spirit that's being reflected in the fact that both materials and humans have to wash themselves after interacting with the carcass, and then they'll be unclean until evening. Verse 33, and if any of them falls into any earthenware vessel, all that is in it shall be unclean, and you shall break it. Any food in it that could be eaten, on which water comes, shall be unclean. And all drink that could be drunk from every such vessel shall be unclean. And everything on which any part of their carcass falls shall be unclean. Whoever, whether oven or stove, it shall be broken in pieces. They are unclean and shall remain unclean for you. Nevertheless, a spring or a cistern holding water shall be clean, but whoever touches a carcass in them shall be unclean. And if any part of their carcass falls upon any seed grain that is to be sown, it is clean. But if water is put on the seed and any part of their carcass falls on it, it is unclean to you. And if any animal which you may eat dies, whoever touches its carcass shall be unclean until the evening, and whoever eats of its carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until the evening. And whoever carries the carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until the evening. So it seems like some situations are probably unavoidable to become unclean, and that's why there's a uniform process for everybody. Verse 41, every swarming thing that swarms on the ground is detestable, it shall not be eaten. Whatever goes on its belly, and whatever goes on all fours, or whatever has many feet, any swarming thing that swarms on the ground, and you shall not eat, for they are detestable. You shall not make yourself detestable with any swarming thing that swarms, and you shall not defile yourselves with them, and become unclean through them. For I am the Lord, Yahweh, your God. Consecrate yourselves, therefore, and be holy, for I am holy. You shall not defile yourselves with any swarming thing that crawls on the ground. For I am the Lord who brought you up out of the land of Egypt, or Kemet, to be your God. You shall therefore be holy, for I am holy. This is the law about the beast and the bird and every living creature that moves through the waters, and every creature that swarms on the ground, to make a distinction between the unclean and the clean, and between the living creature that may be eaten and the living creature that may not be eaten. So pretty easy to understand different categories, whether it be the sky, the ground, or the water, and the little crawling insects, what you can and what you cannot eat, as God revealed to the Israelites. Now the priests were supposed to distinguish between the clean and the unclean, and actually help the people live out their covenant. You can see this reflected in other places. I believe we read it before in Leviticus, but also in Ezekiel, about the role of the priest. This book is called Leviticus, right? To help the people and make sure they live out their end of the bargain, their end of the covenant. The verse I want to harp on is verse 44. You may be asking, why is God giving all of these commandments? After all, the Lord made all this food, and there would have been a time when this food wasn't restricted, like to the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They did not have these commandments against these various kinds of food. They only come into the picture after Israel is brought out of Kemet, or brought out of Egypt. Okay, so why is God giving this commandments to a generation that the forefathers wouldn't have known? Well, it's explained in verse 44. For I am the Lord your God. Consecrate yourselves therefore and be holy, for I am holy. I want to emphasize that because that is a verse where, if you know your Bibles, is in the New Testament. Be holy, just as the Lord is holy. Now what that means is there's a clear principle here. When we understand the letter of the law, commandments given to a specific people to make them stand out, and the spirit of the law, the spirit of the commandment behind it, we can sort of see the spirit behind this commandment is that, well, you are called to be a special people, so you need to be set apart as I, the Lord, am set apart. The word holy just means set apart, after all. So because God is saving his people for himself, and because he has a plan for them in the earth, he is telling them, all right, y'all need to be set apart because I have called you. So when you understand the principle of the commandments and the letter of the law given to a specific people, we can understand the way that principle works for us as believers in the Messiah, on the other side of the Messiah, whether we be Jew or Gentile. And all the things that pertain to that, about how in our own context, whatever society we may come from, whether in the West or the East, we can universally see the importance of being holy as the Lord is holy, even if we're not Hebrews, or even if we don't identify with that ancient culture. The principle, the spirit of the command is very relevant for us today. And obviously, my playlist, God of the Diaspora, the African nation as well as the Hebrew nation, there is a lot of overlap that I get joy studying. So even now, such as the Beta Israel community in Ethiopia, there are now members in our diaspora, in our community, that are, implicated, directly connected to the Lord by nature of the covenant. Genesis 12, by nature of these types of relationships in the law of God revealed to Moses, that many people take these things seriously, even in our modern time, whether they accept the Messiah or not. So I just think that's beautiful as well. As someone who's, is studying the law of God, reading Leviticus, I got love for the law of God. I love seeing Hebraic forms of worship and indigenous forms of worship should be protected and preserved. So when people do it in the right spirit, when people voluntarily do these things in the right spirit, I get a lot of joy. Because there's a lot of false doctrine that people who may mean well or may mean unwell spread as well. Like we know the circumcision party does not represent the true gospel as far as the New Testament is concerned, right? So you don't need the circumcision to be saved, right? That is actually undercutting what the Messiah, what Jesus did. But at the same time, for those who have this heritage, who want to do these things as a means to represent that, as because you don't have to stop being Jewish or Hebrew if you're in the Messiah, we could actually see Hebraic forms of worship both preserved and upheld in the New Testament. And we can see the beauty of that, especially in these churches of the East, these African churches today, which I get a lot of joy studying, both the Beta Israel community, the African Jews that we can verify there, as well as the ancient African church that live right next to, who believe in the same God and accept the Messiah, whose forms of worship are also very Hebraic and obedient to the law of God, as these scriptures that we are reading right now give us a framework of. So just beautiful things to think about when we consider the broader things of God and the global body of Christ that I love to study. So with that being said, we're going to go to Leviticus chapter 12, a very short chapter, purification after childbirth. So this is for the ladies. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the people of Israel, saying, if a woman conceives and bears a male child, she shall be unclean for 7 days. As at the time of her menstruation, she shall be unclean. And on the 8th day of the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. Then she shall continue for 33 days in the blood of her purifying. She shall not touch anything holy, nor come into the sanctuary until the days of her purifying are completed. But if she bears a female child, then she shall be unclean 2 weeks, as in her menstruation. And she shall continue in the blood of her purifying for 66 days. So if you have a female child, the time for purification is doubled. Verse 6, and when the days of your purifying are completed, whether for a son or for a daughter, she shall bring to the priest at the entrance of the tent of meeting a lamb a year old for a burnt offering, and a pigeon or a turtle dove for a sin offering, and he shall offer it before the Lord and make atonement for her. Then he shall be clean from the flow of her blood. This is the law of her who bears a child, either male or female. And if she cannot afford a lamb, then she shall take 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons, one for a burnt offering and the other for a sin offering. And the priest shall make atonement for her, and she shall be clean." Now I want to pause on this verse. So this is pretty easy to understand. All right, women have babies. When you have a baby, here's this rules and laws for the purification of, the purification time window, whether you have a male seed or a female seed. And here's what you need to do, what you can offer at the time of that completion. Why I want to harp on this, because we got to think, Jesus was Jewish. Jesus was an Israelite. Jewish, specifically, he was from the tribe of Judah. He was an Israelite. He was a Hebrew. That means his mother was a Hebrew. So the way we can wrap this up is think about the Virgin Mary. or the Virgin Miriam. Okay, Jesus' mama. She followed this, and we actually see it recorded in the New Testament. Alright, Luke 2:22. This is the New Testament. And when the time came for the purification according to the law of Moses, they brought him, being baby Jesus, up to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. As it is written in the law of the Lord, every male who first opens the womb shall be called holy to the Lord, and to offer a sacrifice according to what is said in the law of the Lord, a pair of turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. Now this gives us some pretty interesting details. Number one, it shows us that Jesus was the firstborn. Number one, it gives us an idea that Jesus' family wasn't so wealthy because they had to use 2 turtle doves. As we read in the law, turtle doves is what you would use when you couldn't afford, I believe it was a bull or what wasn't necessarily what you would ordinarily offer for a burnt offering. So the Bible provides an alternative if you don't have enough money, and we see this is what Jesus' family offers for Mary's purification. So not only does it give us a glimpse that Jesus' family wasn't wealthy or wasn't super wealthy, but we can also see the way the law of God relates to Christ, because everybody would have to do this. Every woman would have to undergo this purification ritual after she had children, but now for the first time we're dealing with for someone who was born of a virgin. For now we're dealing with someone who, while he's following the law, is still completely different from everyone else. And from the very inception, from him being conceived of a virgin, without sex, we can see from the very beginning the intersection of these things that play a role in how Christ was unique from everyone else. And then after being a carpenter, when he about 33, he would begin his ministry as the Messiah. And eventually he would declare that who he was the Messiah. And thousands of years later, from the Old Testament, we can vindicate him in that role compared to other people who made that claim. So with all that being said, y'all be blessed in the Messiah. See you in the next video. We're going to be doing some more stuff about ancient Israelite theology, because there's a lot of misconceptions in our modern time about what the nature of God is. And yeah, it's going to be dope. So y'all see y'all in the next video. Peace.